This happened when I was on a trip with my family in Tottori, Japan. I was in elementary school at the time. We often went to Tottori during the summer holidays. It's where my father's family are from and my granddad still lives there. We were staying with him and seeing other family members for about 4 or 5 nights. And then we were going to go to a hot springs for a couple of nights. This story takes place at the hot springs. I was going through puberty at the time and I was pretty embarrassed to go into the hot springs with my family. My mom, dad and brother wanted to go there. I went down to the springs with them. But I made some excuse and I headed back to the room to watch TV. The TV was pretty boring that night and I wasn't really watching it. I think that it was about 10 p.m. when I decided to turn the TV off and start playing on my Game Boy. I crawled over on my hands and knees to the TV to hit the standby button. The screen faded and I looked into the screen to see the whole room reflected behind me. It looked like I was looking through a fishy lens. I saw myself in the middle of the screen, but diagonally behind me, in the corner of the room, was another person. It was a woman wearing a yukata. A yukata is like a kimono, but perhaps a little less formal. You often see them at hot springs and festivals, things like that. I couldn't see her face because she was facing the corner. It was horrible. For a while I was just stuck there on all fours, frozen, frightened and very confused. I couldn't take my eyes off of the woman in the corner. I don't know how many seconds or minutes passed, but I didn't move. The woman in the yukata didn't move either, not to my knowledge or recollection. At least, all of a sudden, and the TV was back on. Did I do that? I wondered. I didn't think that I did. Maybe my fingers moved unconsciously. It was also weird. I felt as if I was free from something. Perhaps sleep paralysis. I instinctively looked towards the corner and I saw that the woman was no longer there. The TV blared out a happy, upbeat intro to some game show or other. I was there trying to figure out what was happening. I questioned reality for a while. They're on all fours. I snapped out of it and I went to turn the TV off again for the second time. I don't know why I did that. I'm not sure if I did it out of relief or it was an impulse to do it out of bravery. I guess I wanted to prove that what just happened must have been a dream or something. The TV picture faded and there again, in the corner of the room, stood the woman in the yukata facing the corner. I stared in her reflection in the TV out of horror and disbelief. I was staring at her and she twitched her shoulders as if she realized my eyes were on her. I was sure that she was aware of me. Now it was so creepy. I thought that the level of fear I felt rise up in me was unbearable. I thought that I couldn't be more frightened by this phantom woman in my hotel room. But I was wrong because she began to turn her head to face me internally. I pleaded with her to stop and with my eyes to allow me to look away. But neither of those prayers were answered. I promised that I wouldn't get so dumb, brave, or curious again. So many thoughts were swarming around my mind. She turned to face me and I saw her face and then suddenly, as if a weight was lifted, I was in control of my eyelids. I shut my eyes. I was then woken up by the sound of my family coming back to the room from the hot springs. I had fallen asleep in front of the TV and I was in bed. I was so relieved to see them again. I didn't let them turn off the TV that night. I didn't want to see that woman again. I couldn't sleep with my back facing back corner. So I had a sleepless, yet thankfully, uneventful night. I still don't know if that was a nightmare or if it was reality, but I think that something happened in that hotel room, specifically in the corner. So I have this ability to get tangled up with strange people once every few years or so. I'll try to explain, but this is a weird one. I meet elderly men and women, and middle-aged people. They always seem to be a little older than my parents. These people come up to me out of the blue and speak to me as if I'm a close friend. And sometimes they even call me their teacher or their family member. I have never met any of them before, yet they seem to all think that they know me. I thought it was just some sort of prank at first. I thought it might even be secretly recorded for content. But no, they are adamant that they know me. It's the strangest thing. I used to ignore these weird encounters at first and think of them as nothing but mistaken identity. But there have been too many now, and this morning I had an encounter that proved divisive. It happened when I got off the train. This morning, as soon as I got onto the platform, an older man came rushing over to me. He threw his arms around me and said, "Dad, it's you." I was used to meeting someone who thought they knew me. But now a man older than me, probably older than my parents, who was calling me dad and hugging me. This can't be right, I thought to myself. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Everything around me seemed to dull. I was just locked in that moment with that man. It was seriously weird. I snapped back to my senses and I told him that he was wrong. I wasn't his dad, but he wouldn't drop it. I told him politely at first he had got the wrong guy, had to get a little firmer with him. But that only served to irritate him. Why are you pretending to be someone else? He asked me. I was talking fast, babbling, because I wanted to get away from him. I told him I had to go and that he had made a mistake. But he wouldn't get away from me because our argument had heated up. We caught the attention of the station guard. The station guard tried to usher us out of the station. But when the old man began to get angrier and angrier, he pulled us both into some kind of train station. Office room. Set us down and he looked at the old man. I watched the concern grow on his face. I guess at that point he was contemplating how to deal with him. He asked the old man why he was causing so much trouble and the old man began to tell his story. This is pretty much how it went. He said that his dad passed away 20 years ago. He said that normally when people die, their memories fade away and only their soul can be reincarnated. However, his father claimed to have possessed the power to pass on his memories to another as well as his soul. He promised that his memories and experiences would live on through someone else and that he would see his friends and family again someday, but in a different body. He said that of course no one believed his father's promise at first, but members of his family kept saying that they had seen his father here and there. He began to believe that he might see his father again someday, and he triumphantly said that today was that day. The station staff and I must have looked confused. The old man looked to be fully composed. Now he was sure of what he was saying. He looked to be a wealthy man too. He didn't look like an idiot. He kept repeating himself over and over about the reincarnation of the soul and memories and how his dad chose me. Because I'm of a certain general rational age, I couldn't make sense of it. When he finally took a break from speaking, the station guard told him that it was a simple case of mistaken identity. I thought to myself, more like a simple case of identity. The old man stared at him with a powerful look on his face and said, "Could you ever mistake your dad for someone else?" The station guard continued to tell him he was wrong, but the old man wouldn't listen. It was a pain in the ass. I was trying to find the right opportunity to leave. I got up, I had enough, and just as I turned to leave, the old man stood up with me and presented me a business card. It had his contact information on it and he wrote his personal address on the back of the card. I took it from him. I hoped that would be the end of it. He grabbed my hand with both of his and then said, "Listen, when you get your memories back, you call me, okay, Dad?" I looked at his business card and he was high up in a company I had heard of. I went home and checked the company's website and I saw his face right there on their homepage. Something struck a chord with me. He looked younger in that photo and kind of familiar. I guess I sat there insanely confused for a second and I thought to myself, maybe I should give him a call. It only happened this morning, but if something else comes of it, I'll be back to let you know. So this happened 10 years ago. To the day. My family consists of 4 members. I'm the wife and mother to my husband and 2 daughters. When this story takes place, my daughters were both in elementary school. After working for a company for about 3 years, my husband applied to transfer to another area in the country, the Kansai region. We decided to rent a detached house. We found a hell of a deal. The residential area was a little old. This happened when I was in the 1st or 2nd year at junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. The nearest train station was about a 20-minute walk away and I often cycled. So in less than 10 minutes you could get to the station or the supermarket. It wasn't bad. Our new house was great. It had a huge garden, 4 bedrooms, a living room, a bathroom, a dining room and a kitchen. The house was built 50 years ago. It's a little older than we hoped for, but we were really pleased and I remember agreeing with my husband to live there for 3 or 4 years at least. I think that's what the lease was. For 3 years or so he had no hesitation in signing on the dotted line. The rent was being paid by his company. There would be no way we could afford that house without his company's help. So it felt like life was very luxurious. We had been living in our new home for about 3 months when I got sick. I had never had a serious illness before and I rarely catch colds. But I developed cholangitis. It's an inflammation of the bile duct. That illness put me in the hospital for 3 weeks. I was told that my illness must have been caused by fatigue. Likely I strained too hard while moving in. I didn't think that was right. But I wasn't going to argue with the doctors in the state I was in. Strangely, the inflammation spread to my liver while in hospital. It was horrible. I went yellow with jaundice. Fortunately, the treatment took effect and I was discharged from hospital. But since that illness, I felt like my energy levels never really got back to the way they used to be. I found myself tiring easily not long after I had recovered. My eldest daughter was taken ill. She had tonsillitis. Her throat had swollen so much due to irritation that she struggled to breathe. We took her to the hospital one night because it kept getting worse and worse. The paramedic in the emergency room told us that her trachea, the passageway for breathing, had almost closed over. She was on the verge of suffocation. So we had to sudden illnesses, all relatively early into our new life, and consign our new home. I started to have strange and suspicious thoughts about our home. Something began to feel not quite there. I asked my husband how he felt and he said that there was nothing wrong with the house. He laughed at my paranoia. He wouldn't have known if anything was wrong. Anyways, he was always busy at work. I didn't ask him again after he laughed at me. A few months passed and my daughter was riding her bike to her after-school studies. We put her in a cram school. She was hit by a minivan. The minivan had made a sudden turn on the road. It wasn't my daughter's fault. She broke her arm and some of her ribs. Fortunately, it wasn't life-threatening. But she needed surgery on her arm as it had a compound fracture. 2 accidents are plausible. But this third one really spooked me. Everyone in our family besides my husband had either been stricken with illness or had been in an accident. I couldn't help but believe that this wasn't a coincidence. Just as I was arriving at this conclusion, I heard something disturbing from my neighbor. I don't know how I came up in conversation, but it did many years ago. In place of our neighborhood was a large cemetery graveyard. During the renovations, town replanning and land adjustment post the effects of the Second World War, it was decided that the graves would be dug up and moved to another area. However, the neighbors say that even in recent times, human bones can still be found in the soil beneath these houses and beneath the grass in the garden. It was then that I realized that our family home had been sitting atop of desecrated graves. I felt swept all over my back. I was genuinely terrified by this realization. I had to go tell my husband. Once I told him, he looked shocked. I guess that he was thinking about himself and how he was the only one who hadn't had anything bad happen to him. It was already on my mind. I asked, pleaded with him, to agree to move house. I don't care if I sounded superstitious. I couldn't risk another member of our family getting hurt. We broke our lease with that house over the graveyard and told them that we would be leaving as soon as we found a new place. I didn't care. I didn't ever want to see the shock on my daughter's face as she played in the garden, only to trip over a human bone. We had to pay a penalty fee for breaking the lease, and after all those hospital bills, it wasn't exactly welcome. We found a new place within a week and I was really happy about that. As I was packing up some boxes, I got a call. It was from my husband's work. They told me he was heading to hospital in an ambulance. I was so scared and nervous for him. I raced to the hospital and I was relieved to hear that he had kidney stones and all he had to do was just pass the stone. After he recovered and we moved home, all the weird injuries and accidents ended. We're still living a quiet and peaceful life here. I really believe that something was conspiring against our family in that house. The atmosphere was so heavy there. All of our moods were much lower than they are today. It's like we didn't even like one another in that house. I can't explain it. Or maybe it could have been a series of coincidences. All I know is that if a series of unfortunate events before us your family, at the same rate it did mine, maybe you should try and find out if there's something more than bad luck at play. Question all aspects of your situation. How well do you know the history of the home you live in? This happened last year. I used to live close to a famous temple in Nagano. I lived in that area for about half a year. Due to the nature of my work, I was used to getting transferred. The company always rents me an apartment. During these periods, it was always fun to live somewhere new and stay in different kinds of accommodations. I particularly liked that apartment in Nagano. Right in front of the building was an elementary school. If I opened my kitchen window, I would be looking right down at it. I could see the corridor leading from the gymnasium to the main school building. Kids were always running around down there. You could hear singing and games being played. It was nice hearing. That reminded me of my youth, huh? I remember when the school must have been preparing for a musical because they were singing so much. I basically learned the songs by overhearing them. I was singing along as I was getting ready for work. I'm a smoker and I didn't want to go all the way downstairs each time for a cigarette. So I would just smoke beneath the ventilation fan in the kitchen. The fan was so close to the kitchen window too. So I would always throw that open and let the night air in. Once Sunday night, just before midnight, I was smoking in the kitchen and I heard the sound of singing. I thought to myself, is the school still practicing that musical at this hour? It didn't seem right. I stood there listening, wondering what was going on. I shut off the noisy fan and listened closely. I then realized that it wasn't singing. I heard it sounded more like chanting. I remembered that the temple was close by. It didn't seem that creepy. When there was a logical explanation. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I finished my cigarette and went to close the window. Just before I closed it, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Something was moving down there in the darkness. When I saw it, I swear my heart stopped for a second. The chanting was coming from the school. There in the corridor between the gym and the main building, where children stood stuck, still looking up towards my building, or perhaps looking up at me. Someone was pacing up and down in some sort of costume, some robes or something. They were walking up and down the rows and rows of children. I will never forget it. It was so eerie. I couldn't see the children's faces clearly. I could only see the streetlights reflecting in their eyes. I shut that window as quickly as I could. But despite the window being closed, I couldn't close my mind off from the image of those children staring up at me. A few moments after the window was closed, the chanting stopped. I was grateful for that. It was a horrible sound where there were really children chanting at midnight on a Sunday. It was so odd. But I saw it. I know I saw it. I went to the fridge and poured a drink and then a couple more. I have to admit I went a little too far that night. I passed out as soon as I got in bed. I'm glad I did, because I didn't want to be up all night thinking about what I had seen. I woke up the next day and went about my routine with a degree of caution. When I heard the children singing, I couldn't help but feel like it sounded more like chanting. I had to stop myself from singing along with them. I didn't like listening to them anymore since that night. I didn't smoke late at night in my kitchen anymore and I started to go to bed a little earlier. I don't know if the chanting still happened out there. I frankly didn't want to know. I wish I asked my neighbors about it, but I didn't ever get to know them. Things went pretty smoothly after that, until I was transferred. However, I did wake up a few times in the middle of the night and every now and then someone would ring my doorbell late at night. These things always happen on Sunday after midnight. I wish I had a better ending for you. But I had to leave and I am not sorry to say I left when I did. I think being described as a great storyteller is a wonderful compliment. It's a rare talent. When you listen to someone who can spin a good yarn, it's almost like the world stands still for a moment. I've never had the talent to frighten or amuse people like that. But my cousin, who's 5 years older than me, she was always fantastic at telling a good story, not just stories, but anecdotes and true experiences. I used to hang on her every word, and whenever I saw her I would always ask her if she had anything new to tell me. I loved it. She stopped sharing her experiences and stories these days, but I want to share with you the story that stayed with me the most. I'll never forget it. I just hope I do a good job, as she did. This happened during the summer. I was in the 3rd year of high school, and when she was in high school she said she was a quiet and shy girl. She described her former self as a husk. Nothing more than an empty shell. She would always take me to supposedly haunted locations, such as abandoned buildings and places steeped in rich rumor and urban legend. But she had stopped. I could tell that something was happening. Even if I asked her, she wouldn't seem all that interested in going. She just gave me non-committal responses. I asked her if she had any new stories, and I tried to tell stories of my own, but she didn't seem to be interested. She didn't look good either. She had dark circles under her eyes and her complexion was pale. One day I asked her what was wrong, and that was when she told me this story. She told me that since the spring, she had been suffering with strange dreams. She said that they were less like dreams, but more like memories being replayed. Memories from when she was really young. She saw herself playing in the sand pit in her local park. She wasn't remembering it, but seeing it through someone else's eyes. She was far from herself in terms of proximity. She was on the other side of the field. She was looking at herself from the other side of the field. The dreams would occur frequently, and after a while she would do everything to try and dig up her own buried memories. When she was younger, she would always go to the park and play alone there. It was right by her home. In one dream, she was able to see her memories from her eyes, and when she looked up from the sandpit, she saw a woman with long, immaculate dark hair, dressed in pale pink, stood staring at her. She said that the woman in pink noticed that my cousin saw her, and the dream abruptly ended and she woke up the instant. The woman in pink's eyes met my cousin's the next night. The recurring dream was different. The setting had changed and she was no longer in the park. She was older. Now she was still in elementary school, but older. There was a parents' day at school. All the parents were there watching her stood outside the classroom. My cousin was picked on by the teacher to answer a question, and she got it right. She looked back proudly to see if her mother had acknowledged her, and as she cast her eyes over the rows of parents, she found a familiar set of eyes. Her mother was there that day, in reality smiling at her child's proud moment. But in her dream, the woman with immaculate black hair dressed in pale pink was glaring at home once again. When their eyes met, the dream ended. The next dream came, and there she was in her final year of elementary school. It was sports day. This time she was taking part in a relay race. She was stood on her mark awaiting her classmate to hand her the baton. The race was between all the classes in her age group. There was a lot of pressure. She braced herself when she heard the rushing of oncoming footfall. She glanced back in anticipation to receive the baton, only to see the woman in pale pink fast walking towards her. She broke into a sprint, and my cousin said that the speed she was moving was horrifying. My cousin ran from her instinctively, but again glanced back and saw that the woman in pink's face was pale and blank, but she had bright red lipstick to lips. She was grinning. The next day she had a premonition that she would see the woman in pale pink again in her dreams, and the premonition came true. The next dream appeared as a memory from her high school years. She was in band practice. She used to play the trombone. She would join the piece of music at the same time as the piano. The moment arrived and she took a deep breath, and then she heard the jolting, horrid sounds of someone hammering away at the piano keys. She looked towards the piano, and there was the woman in pale pink glaring at her once again. This was the first time she got a clear and thorough look at the woman's face. She said that she had white bright skin, pale, almond-shaped eyes, a high nose, again that bright red lipstick covering her lips, as they seemed to spread impossibly wide, revealing a mouthful of grinning, menacing teeth. She was again glaring and smiling. It was at this point she noticed that the woman from her dreams had protruding canine teeth. The immaculate hair was gone. It was all red. Now she shook it from side as she stared. My cousin woke up, covered in sweat but realizing something. The woman in pink was getting closer with each dream. It started when she was in elementary school, and now she was reliving her memories in middle school. Was she chasing her through her memories? If this hypothesis was correct, then every time she went to sleep, the woman in pale pink drew closer and closer. She said that she saw the woman sit opposite her on the train. She saw her at the top of the stairs in her former family home. She even saw her sit next to her at school. It was at this point that she realized another kind of low-world change in her dreams. The distance between her and the woman in pale pink was shrinking. She could see her more clearly. She noticed the revolting details, the whites of her eyes, the saliva that seemed to cling to her teeth as she smiled, as if she was salivating as she looked at my cousin. So my cousin took to drinking coffee and energy drinks more than she probably should. Actually, she tried everything she could to put off going to sleep, but all the caffeine she consumed would only prove to be a temporary measure, as the woman would appear during her daydreams. At last, The woman in pink caught up with her current aging memories. When she told me this, she hung her head and fell silent. Her black hair was clinging to her face through sweat. I wanted to know the conclusion to the story. I needed to hear the ending. So I asked her to let me know what happened. When the woman in pink got too close, she looked up at me and gave me a hollow laugh. What did I just tell you? She caught up with me. She then smiled and I saw a flicker of some canines I hadn't seen before. She looked different. Somehow I have to say that I'm not that sad that we aren't in touch. Something's changed. She doesn't speak to anyone these days. But I hope her old former self comes back. Because I missed that version of her. I am scared of the woman from her dreams. Thanks to our special guest. Listen, Lupus. Please head over and check out his channel and make sure you subscribe and check out a couple of videos. Thanks, as always, for watching, liking, sharing and commenting, and for those who bought me beers recently. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's never a prerequisite to, watch stuff here, but it's a good way to help out the channel. Absolutely no obligation to. Anyway, please consider subscribing. If you're new, I'll be back with a new video. I'll see you soon.